this community. Do you think there should be, or?
I kind of believe in both sides, because I think that there shouldn't be, because a lot of like beliefs and conversation about certain things wouldn't be heard if people were censored about what they can and can't say. But also this is such a diverse school that, and with people of so many different backgrounds, that maybe there should also be some time or place that you can go and not be questioned or attacked.
Okay, thank you so much.
So, first thing, so what do you think of when you think of safe spaces?
That's a good question. My interpretation of safe space is kind of like a welcoming, like kind of warm environment where, you know, you can feel free to talk freely. But I know that's not the kind of interpretation others have of it. So, yeah, I'm worried that word kind of connotates a lot of negative things for some people. But for me, it's just about like being friendly and like being human and recognizing other people's humanity. It's kind of simple, I think. But
yeah. And do you think there's any like drawbacks to that one anyway? Or?
No, I think the main drawback is people, I think, assume that like to recognize one's humanity means that you can't have confrontation or you can't like have debates. But I think that's untrue. Like you can, but there's a way to be like respectful and like maybe not friendly, but you know, just respectful and courteous of others, but still like be like, I really disagree and this is why. I don't know, people seem to think like in dichotomous ways that either you can't be like courteous and debate something. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very common. Do you have any idea on why it's kind of like characterized that way? Besides like the dichotomy?
Oh, why? Well, one is because it's such a like it's a word that like so many pundits are using now to like be like, oh, millennials are so soft, they need teddy bears, and you know, it just, I feel like it's part of it is ageism. I think like older people just always kind of projecting like anxieties onto the like younger generation. But yeah, I think it's just, I don't know. I mean, that's my belief in safe space. I think other people think that it is a way to coddle the millennium generation, which is like all over, like, you know, Newsweek and Atlantic. They're always like writing stuff about like how millennials are so soft, which I don't think is true. I'm like, they are just like human and like recognizing, you know, but so yeah. I forgot the question. I'm just like rattling on.
Oh no, that's totally right. I was just asking about like why you think they've been characterized.
Oh yeah, because politicians have like dragged that term through the mud, and now it has bad connotations. But
totally. And do you have any like personal experience with like safe spaces or a safe space environment?
Well, one of the interesting things about safe space and trigger warnings is like it's. Like origins are in like thinking about people who are like victims of like sexual abuse and sexual assault, which I think is like often people don't know that, like the critics don't know that, or they just like overlook it. But oh god, I forgot your question again.
No, do you have any personal experience with that?
Personal. Oh yeah, that's right. So, what do you mean, like as a student or like
as a student, as being around, talking to somebody who's been there, or just an environment that you felt characterized as safe space? Okay,
so I will say this, as a graduate student here, I've been in very hostile spaces, which is, I think, counterproductive to like intellectual growth and inquiry. I've also, like as a teacher outside of this institution, at other institutions, have tried to create a safe space, and I think that it has profound, I think that it has very positive impact. So yeah, I'm kind of, I don't know, people are staring. So that's my experience. I've been in both safe and hostile, as both student and instructor, actually.
So what is it about Dean Allison's letter?
Okay. So the letter from the dean that was sent out to freshmen on campus seemed kind of silly to me, because it said that we believe in the free exchange of ideas and we're not going to coddle students. That was what seemed to be the takeaway in terms of tone and message. But those things that he was saying that we're not going to have trigger warnings and safe spaces on campus, we have those, and they are a vital part of the college community. Like the Student Counseling Center, for instance, like all of those resources, I think that those count as safe spaces. And those have been set up and have been recognized as a vital part of the community and as part of, learning and being part of a university that does foster the free exchange of ideas. And trigger warnings, too. I mean, I said earlier in our conversation, not to refer back to it, but I think that just syllabi in general are a content warning, and it's not that hard to just put at the top of your syllabus. Some of these things deal with issues that might be sensitive, and you can even label them. I think that would be fine. Say that there is war, rape, murder, violence, abortion, anything like that. And if you have a problem with this or feel like you might be triggered, come talk to me and we can figure out what to do. That seems fine, and a lot of professors do that. I don't know if people here in Chicago do that, but in other universities that happens. So I thought the letter was kind of a waste of time, and I didn't understand the purpose of it.
You just heard 3 students' opinions, as well as Beth's interview with Professor Stone. But that was just the beginning. You will now hear a debate by members of UC3P, followed by 2 more anonymous student voices. While I could give you an overview of the debate, we believe that it speaks for itself. Our debate moderator is Jack Coghlan, candidate for the Masters of Public Policy at the Harris School of Public Policy. In favor of safe spaces, we have Bryce Fields, candidate for the Masters of Arts program in the Social Sciences. Against safe spaces, we have Matthew Foldi, an undergraduate at U of C and president of the College Republicans. This is the Triple Debate on Safe Spaces.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Triple Debate. I'm here with Bryce and Matthew, and we're going to talk about safe spaces. Bryce, can you give us a quick one-liner about who you are?
Hello, howdy. My name's Bryce. I'm in a Master's of Social Science here at the University of Chicago, and I'm an aspiring community organizer.
And we've got Matthew with us as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew. I'm an undergrad. I'm a third year in the college. I'm president of College Republicans.
That's great. Thanks, guys. We're going to start off with something real basic, and we're going to get a different definition. And we're going to start with Bryce. Bryce, what is a safe space?
A safe space is a place for underrepresented and marginalized perspectives to have a space of conversation.
And Matthew, would you agree with that?
To me, the definition of a safe space, I find 2 kind of definitions of safe spaces that are kind of in conversation when you're talking about college campuses. One is you have a social safe space, which I think is kind of what Bryce is talking about here, where people can gather together. And then the other kind that I have more of an issue with is the intellectual safe space, where it's usually in response to an event where people kind of gather to then just shut out ideas that disagree with them. So I kind of make the distinction between 2 kinds of safe spaces.
I think actually let's just dive into it and say that the intellectual distinction with safe spaces and saying that there's intellectual safe spaces and social safe spaces, I think saying social safe spaces is a conflation with affinity groups and a conflation with gathering with groups of people who are like you and have perspectives and experiences like you and are trying to share in those. And I think that safe spaces are both social and intellectual, and we can get further into the intellectual side of that.
I mean, my point in making the distinction is in the sense that one is usually more permanent and one is in response to something like a speaker on campus or something like that. So I think that there are 2 different kinds of things. I mean, some are kind of institutionalized, like here we have the OMSA, for example, that is an institutionalized, what you would call a safe space, what I would call a social safe space. But then when you would have, like at DePaul with almost any remotely controversial speaker, you'd have a safe space set up in response to that speaker. So they're both, in my eyes, use the same term. They fall under the same umbrella. But I think there's a big distinction between kind of what you're talking about in terms of the intellectual and social one, in terms of what you're defining as that, and what I would define as the intellectual safe spaces in terms of really it's kind of anti-intellectual in how you're not actually exposing yourself to different information.
So we'll just put the bit of context that what really brings us here and why this is relevant for the University of Chicago Public Policy podcast is that Dean Ellison wrote a letter to incoming freshmen just a few months ago, and I quote, "We do not cancel invited speakers because their topics might prove controversial." Now, this came after several speaking events were shut down by protesting and interrupting students, and I wouldn't say that that was necessarily left consistently shutting down right or vice versa. It was quite varied. So I'll start with you, Matthew. Do you support the message of that letter?
I 100% support the message of that letter. And then for the actual, so he had 3 parts, and his part on safe spaces does specifically tackle the issue of intellectual safe spaces. In the course of all of the discussion about this letter, that word intellectual kind of falls by the wayside. So I think it's important to recognize when we're talking in the context of his letter, and I think safe spaces writ large, is the University of Chicago's letter, which kind of started this whole recent iteration of discussion on safe spaces, really takes issue just at the ones that are set up in response to things like speakers on campuses. So I fully support his letter.
So I do disagree with the letter. I think that when we're discussing intellectual and social safe spaces, I would say that in terms of events and speakers, I think that there should be a wider range that is allowed to come to campus and that should be supported in coming to campus. With that said, I do still think it's very important to talk about the quote-unquote intellectual or social safe spaces in regards to the classroom, in regards to the campus as a whole, in regards to residence halls, and just physical spaces in general.
So if you disagree with the process of the letter and what that was trying to achieve, what would have been a better way to achieve the intellectual freedom that they're talking about here?
I think that one of the main principles of safe spaces that I very often see not followed through is that a lot of really good, really beneficial safe spaces are facilitated. They have somebody there who is able to actually guide discussion, to mediate, to manage. And for instance, in a classroom, a professor who's trained would be said facilitator for the safe space. So the reason why this is relevant for the letter is because I feel like when we're talking about intellectual safe spaces and disallowing those, I think it really misses the mark in terms of presenting an image of restricted intellectual inquiry, that people are only getting certain viewpoints and that we're not discussing all intellectual topics, when in the safe space that I defined and that we're promoting here, I think that you're able to actually engage with these different topics and engage with these different perspectives, but to do so in a manner where everyone is safe. And that's where the safe comes from in the safe space.
Do you have any comments on that, Matthew?
Not on that particular.
Okay, that's okay. We can move on, go a bit further afield and talk about our cousins up in Michigan. Last year, they hosted a debate between Julie Bindel, a self-proclaimed radical lesbian feminist, and Milo Yiannopoulos, self-proclaimed the opposite, during the Dangerous Faggot tour. So this was promoting open discussion and having people engage. Bryce, is that a safe space?
I think that that is not necessarily a safe space. And the reason why I say that is because a safe space is one in which you are having safety as being protected, but not necessarily discomfort. So the reason why I wouldn't say that that's a safe space is because there can still be oppressive, there can still be violent, there can still be bigoted views that are harmful and attacking and like threats to safety against people in that space, which is what a safe space is meant to guard against. So just like that in itself, even an intellectual safe space, I don't think it necessarily hits the mark.
I don't think it was a safe space in the way that we're even talking about them here, in the sense that it was an event where there was no kind of like going to the side and not listening to the event. I think that actually sounds fascinating, like a really interesting debate. And when you look at what happens to Milo on other instances of his tour, like at DePaul, I mean, the protesters there stormed the stage and basically threatened him, refused to leave, refused arrest. And there was a safe space right outside and separate outside the event. And you can bet that conservatives were not welcomed into that safe space outside the event because, I mean, it was in pure reaction to his presence on campus. He was able to speak for about 8 minutes before the event was totally canceled, shut down, and disbanded by the protesters.
And that's a similar thing to what happened at the University of Chicago last year.
Similar, we obviously did not have Milo here on campus, but we had 2 events that were shut down by protesters. In one of the cases, they threatened to blow up the speaker after telling him they would follow him around Chicago in his speaking tour there, and then they knew where he would be. So we had some problems that I think are